The Western Front was the main theatre of war during World War I. Following the outbreak of war in August 1914, the German army opened the Western Front first by invading Luxembourg and Belgium, then gaining military control of important industrial regions in France. The tide of the advance was dramatically turned with the Battle of the Marne. Following the race to the sea, both sides dug in along a meandering line of fortified trenches, stretching from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier with France. This line remained essentially unchanged for most of the war. Between 1915 and 1917 there were several major offensives along this front. The attacks employed massive artillery bombardments and massed infantry advances. However, a combination of entrenchments, machine gun nests, barbed wire, and artillery repeatedly inflicted severe casualties on the attackers and counter-attacking defenders. As a result, no significant advances were made. Among the most costly of these offensives were the Battle of Verdun, in 1916, with a combined 700,000 casualties, the Battle of the Somme, also in 1916, with more than 1 million casualties, and the Battle of Passchendaele, in 1917, with roughly 600,000 casualties. In an effort to break the deadlock, this front saw the introduction of new military technology, including poison gas, aircraft and tanks. But it was only after the adoption of improved tactics that some degree of mobility was restored. The German spring offensive of 1918 was made possible by the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk that marked the end of the conflict on the Eastern Front. Using the recently introduced infiltration tactics, the German armies advanced nearly 100 kilometers to the west, which marked the deepest advance by either side since 1914 and very nearly succeeded in forcing a breakthrough. In spite of the generally stagnant nature of this front, this theatre would prove decisive. The inexorable advance of the Allied armies during the second half of 1918 persuaded the German commanders that defeat was inevitable, and the government was forced to sue for conditions of an armistice. The terms of peace were agreed upon with the signing of the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. 1914, German invasion of France and Belgium. At the outbreak of the First World War, the German army executed a modified version of the Schlieffen Plan, designed to quickly attack France through neutral Belgium before turning southwards to encircle the French army on the German border. Belgium's neutrality was guaranteed by Britain under the 1839 Treaty of London. This caused Britain to join the war at the expiration of its ultimatum at 11 p.m. GMT on 4 August. Armies under German generals Alexander von Kluck and Karl von Bülow attacked Belgium on 4 August 1914. Luxembourg had been occupied without opposition on 2 August. The first battle in Belgium was the Siege of Leech, which lasted from 5 to 16 August. Leech was well fortified and surprised the German army under von Bülow with its level of resistance. However, German heavy artillery was able to ruin the key forts within a few days. Following the fall of Leech, most of the Belgian army retreated to Antwerp and Namur, with the Belgian capital, Brussels, falling to the Germans on 20 August. Although the German army bypassed Antwerp, it remained a threat to their flank. Another siege followed at Namur, lasting from about 20 to 23 August. For their part, the French had 5 armies deployed on their borders. The pre-war French offensive plan, Plan 17, was intended to capture Alsace-Lorraine following the outbreak of hostilities. On 7 August the 7th Corps attacked Alsace with its objectives being to capture Mulhouse and Colmeyer. The main offensive was launched on 14 August with 1st and 2nd Armies attacking towards Sarrebourg, Morhange and Lorraine. In keeping with the Schlieffen Plan, the Germans withdrew slowly while inflicting severe losses upon the French. The French advanced the 3rd and 4th Army toward the Saar River and attempted to capture Saarburg, attacking Brie and Neufchâteau. Before being driven back, the French 7th Corps captured Mulhouse after a brief engagement on 7 August. but German reserve forces engaged them in the Battle of Mulhouse and forced a French retreat. The German army swept through Belgium, executing civilians and razing villages. The application of collective responsibility against a civilian population further galvanized the Allies, and newspapers condemned the German invasion and the army's violence against civilians and property, together called the Rape of Belgium. After marching through Belgium, Luxembourg and the Ardennes, the German army advanced, in the latter half of August, into northern France, where they met both the French army, under Joseph Joffre, and the initial 6 divisions of the British Expeditionary Force, under Sir John French. A series of engagements known as the Battle of the Frontiers ensued. Key battles included the Battle of Charleroi and the Battle of Mons. In the former battle, the French Fifth Army was almost destroyed by the German Second and Third Armies, and the latter delayed the German advance by a day. A general Allied retreat followed, resulting in more clashes such as the Battle of Le Cateau, the Siege of Maubeuge and the Battle of Saint-Quentin. The German army came within 70 kilometers of Paris, but at the First Battle of the Marne, French and British troops were able to force a German retreat by exploiting a gap which appeared between the First and Second Armies, ending the German advance into France. The German army retreated north of the Aisne River and dug in there, establishing the beginnings of a static Western Front that was to last for the next 3 years. Following this German setback, the opposing forces tried to outflank each other in the race for the sea, and quickly extended their trench systems from the North Sea to the Swiss frontier. The resulting German-occupied territory held 64% of France's pig iron production, 24% of its steel manufacturing and 40% of the total coal mining capacity, dealing a serious, but not crippling, setback to French industry. On the Entente side, the final lines were occupied by the armies of the Allied countries, with each nation defending a part of the front. From the coast in the north, the primary forces were from Belgium, the British Empire and France. Following the Battle of the Yser in October, the Belgian forces controlled a 35 km length of Belgium's Flanders territory along the coast, known as the Yser Front, along the Yser River and the Ypres Canal, from Nieuwpoort to Bozinghe. Stationed to the south was the sector of the British Expeditionary Force. Here, from the 19th of October until the 22nd of November, the German forces made their final breakthrough attempt of 1914 during the First Battle of Ypres. Heavy casualties were suffered on both sides, but no breakthrough occurred. After the battle, Erich von Falkenhayn reasoned that it was no longer possible for Germany to win the war, and on the 18th of November 1914 he called for a diplomatic solution, but Chancellor Theobald von Bethmann-Hollweg, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff disagreed. By Christmas, the BEF guarded a continual line from the La Bassée Canal to south of St. Eloi in the Somme Valley. The greater part of the front, south to the border with Switzerland, was manned by French forces. 1915, stalemate. Between the coast and the Vosges was an outward bulge in the trench line, named the Noyon salient for the captured French town at the maximum point of advance near Compiègne. Joffre's plan for 1915 was to attack this salient on both flanks to cut it off. The British would form the northern attack force by pressing eastward in Artois, while the French attacked in Champagne. On the 10th of March, as part of what was intended as a larger offensive in the Artois region, the British Army attacked at Neuve-Chapelle in an effort to capture the Aubers Ridge. The assault was made by 4 divisions along a 3-kilometer front, preceded by a concentrated bombardment lasting 35 minutes. The initial assault made rapid progress and the village was captured within 4 hours. The advance then slowed because of problems with logistics and communications. The Germans then brought up reserves and counter-attacked, forestalling the attempt to capture the ridge. Since the British had used about 1/3 of their supply of artillery shells, General Sir John French blamed the failure on the shortage of shells. Despite the success of the initial attack, gas warfare. All sides signed treaties which prohibited the use of chemical weapons in warfare before World War I. In spite of this, World War I saw large-scale chemical warfare. Despite the German plans to maintain the stalemate with the French and British, German commanders planned an offensive at the Belgian town of Ypres, which the British had defended in November 1914. This Second Battle of Ypres was intended to divert attention from offensives in the Eastern Front while disrupting Franco-British planning and to test a new weapon: the second misuse of chemical weapons. On the 22nd of April, after a two-day bombardment, the Germans released 168 tons of chlorine gas onto the battlefield. Being heavier than air, the gas crept across no man's land and drifted into the British trenches. The green-yellow cloud asphyxiated some defenders, and those in the rear fled in panic, creating an undefended 6-kilometer wide gap in the Allied line. The Germans were unprepared for the level of their success and lacked sufficient reserves to exploit the opening. Canadian troops quickly arrived and drove back the German advance. The gas attack was repeated 2 days later and caused a 5-kilometer withdrawal of the Franco-British line, but the opportunity had been lost. The success of this attack would not be repeated, as the Allies countered by introducing gas masks and other countermeasures. An example of the success of these measures came a year later, on the 27th of April at Leech, 40 kilometers to the south of Ypres, where the 16th Division withstood several German gas attacks. Air warfare this year also saw the introduction of aeroplanes specifically modified for aerial combat, while planes had already been used in the war for scouting. On the 1st of April, the French pilot Roland Garros became the first to shoot down an enemy plane by using a machine gun that shot forward through the propeller blades. This was achieved by crudely reinforcing the blades so bullets which hit them were deflected away. Several weeks later, Garros was forced to land behind German lines. His plane was captured and sent to Dutch engineer Anthony Fokker, who soon produced a significant improvement: the interrupter gear, in which the machine gun is synchronized with the propeller so it fires in the intervals when the blades of the propeller are out of the line of fire. This advance was quickly ushered into service. In the Fokker EI, the first single-seat fighter aircraft to combine a reasonable maximum speed with an effective armament, Maxim Ellman scored the first confirmed kill in a 9-decker on the 1st of August. This started a back-and-forth arms race, as both sides developed improved weapons, engines, airframes and materials, which continued until the end of the war. It also inaugurated the cult of the ace, the most famous being the Red Baron. Contrary to the myth, anti-aircraft fire claimed more kills than fighters. Continued Entente attacks. The final Entente offensive of the spring was fought at Artois, with the goal of trying to capture Vimy Ridge. The French 10th Army attacked on the 9th of May after a 6-day bombardment and advanced 5 kilometers. However, they retreated as they had come into sights of machine gun nests, and the German reinforcements fired artillery at the attackers. By the 15th of May the advance had been stopped, although the fighting continued until the 18th of June. In May the German army captured a French document at La Ville-aux-Bois describing a new system of defense. Rather than relying on a heavily fortified front line, the defense is arranged in a series of echelons. The front line would be a thinly manned series of outposts, reinforced by a series of strongpoints and a sheltered reserve. If a slope was available, troops were deployed along the rear side for protection. The defense became fully integrated with command of artillery at the divisional level. Members of the German High Command viewed this new scheme with some favor, and it later became the basis of an elastic defense in-depth doctrine against Entente attacks. During autumn of 1915, the Fokker scourge began to have an effect on the battlefront as Allied spotter planes were nearly driven from the skies. These reconnaissance planes were used to direct gunnery and photograph enemy fortifications, but now the Allies were nearly blinded by German fighters. However, the impact of German air superiority was diminished by their doctrinal reluctance to risk their pilots' capture by fighting over Allied-held territory. In September 1915, the Entente Allies launched another offensive, with the French attacking at Champagne and the British at Loos. The French had spent the summer preparing for this action, with the British assuming control of more of the front to release French troops for the attack. The bombardment, which had been carefully targeted by means of aerial photography, began on the 22nd of September. Rather than retreating, the Germans adopted a new defense in-depth scheme that consisted of a series of defensive zones and positions with a depth of up to 8.0 kilometers. On the 25th of September, the British began their assault at Loos, which was meant to supplement the larger Champagne attack. The attack was preceded by a 4-day artillery bombardment of 250,000 shells and a release of 5,100 cylinders of chlorine gas. The attack involved 2 corps in the main assault and 2 more corps performing diversionary attacks at Ypres. The British suffered heavy losses, especially due to machine gun fire, during the attack and made only limited gains before they ran out of shells. A renewal of the attack on 13 October fared little better. In December, British Field Marshal Sir John French was replaced by General Douglas Haig as commander of the British forces.